Um, my name is Pradeep Gowda. I've been programming in Python since the last millennium. That has a nice ring to it. Let me get this. So this is what I do. I lead the development efforts at Nth Energy, and we use Python extensively, even though that's not the only thing we use, but that's our primary language. And yeah, I've been using Python professionally since 2002. My Python genealogy is something like this. I started with, interestingly, on Windows, Python COM. I started using Python because I was not making any headway with using Visual Basic to do some text parsing. I was building some decision trees representation that needed certain kind of text formatting, and Visual Basic was probably the least useful thing for that. So I started using Python through COM. That's how I got started in Python professionally. And I went on to write some Zope clone code. I discovered Django. Yep. I discovered Django around 2006 or so when it came out. I also did some professional coding in web.py, pylons, and then of course Flask, and now Pyramid. Now I use both Flask and Pyramid. They both have their place, but I would say I still use both of them equally. So what is Flask? It's a micro framework created by Armin Ronacher. I guess that's his right pronunciation. So he wrote this framework as a joke, actually, on April 1st. In fact, the name Flask is inspired by Bottle. When Bottle came out, a lot of people were excited that, oh, there is a framework that's all, one file. Download one file and you can actually do web development, as opposed to Django. Well, and let's not forget Zope. Well, basically, you had to download maybe a couple of 100 megabytes of installation to get started. The Zope is more like you are customizing Zope than you are doing development. So that's the thing you have to keep in mind, which surprises me that people actually like Django even after having seen that. But computer science, programming is a field where people hardly learn anything from history, because if they don't make all the mistakes themselves, it's not real. So there you have Django, anyway. So why did Armin write this? Because he thought that it was silly that one file framework was getting all the hype, and people are actually ignoring a lot of good work done elsewhere. In fact, he wrote WorkZug. It's the WSGI framework, and then he's also the author of Jinja 2. Which is a templating engine inspired by Django. Well, some things do come out of Django, some interesting things. So, so Jinja is inspired by Django templating language, but you're not limited to the syntax, Django template syntax. In fact, Jinja 2 is powerful enough that you can simulate other templating languages, let's say ASP or Marco, and you can probably port some of your code from other templating languages over to this. I don't know whether that's actually practical, but you can do it. So he wanted to write a framework which is, uses all this, and then something also funny. So what he did was he basically put out a single page web framework front page in this site. In fact, you can go to this page and look at it. It's still up. And this was the Python single file Python code. That is a framework. If you opened up this file and looked into it, you'll see a big blob, binary blob in the middle of it. So what he did essentially was basically zip up both WorkZug and Jinja into a binary blob and then package that into a single file. So that was the infamous, we can say, start of Flask. But when people actually started taking this idea seriously, he made this into a standalone framework. Even though Flask is not a single file framework, but I believe there is a configuration when you can actually have the entire framework as single file, or maybe it was there in the early version. But that is no longer a goal. Having everything in one file is no longer a goal for Flask. But what is the goal of Flask is really simplicity and being small. So, in fact, one of the earlier frameworks that really inspired me was web.py, written by Aaron Swartz when he was at Reddit. Web.py was the first Python framework I sort of remember, where you could open a text editor and then type probably like 5 to 10 lines of code, and then you have a web program that does something useful, which is not that strange coming from, let's say, coming from a PHP background. All said and done, PHP has one strength, that is, you can open up Notepad, not Notepad, open up Emacs or Vim or whatever. So, and then type a line of code, and then you have something working, right? So, web.py is the first framework that came close to that. That's always been something that attracted me in web frameworks. And then people talk about single file applications. Though you start with a single file, I don't think your end application is going to be a single file, unless it is very simple. But what is important is being able to refactor your application that started out as a single file app into a handful of modules which fit into your head, which is possible in Flask, and which is the design criteria, in fact. And the other thing is, once you start getting familiar with the Python ecosystem, you will start developing a taste for things. You will start understanding why a few libraries are better than others, and how the decision choices made by a few libraries are better for you in the long run, even though they may not be easy to start with. But how do you put them together at the same time maintain this flexibility? So, Flask came out with the intention of satisfying these kind of needs. So, what is the key feature of Flask? I would say it's one of the easiest frameworks to learn. In fact, I often recommend people that they should pick up Flask if they want to learn web programming. Forget Python web programming. I say Flask is what you should learn if you want to learn web programming, unless you are doing PHP. That's a different ball of game. The second important thing is good tasteful defaults. Good, we will see how the good thing plays out, but tasteful. In fact, the one thing I have against most PHP code is they are not tasteful. It gets the job done, but it's not very tasteful. I mean, if it is not tasteful, then it's a mix of random ad hoc choices that they are not pleasure to look at, they are not pleasure to maintain, definitely not pleasure to keep working at day in and day out. So, Flask makes a lot of good choices by default, but of course, you are not tied to them. And it has excellent documentation. In fact, if you can go on the web and look at the Flask website, it's laid out in a way that you can find what you're looking for in good typography. If that matters to you, it matters to me, but the documentation looks good. And so, of course, once you start with a single file application, you're not going to stop at that. In fact, this ToDo application started out with a single list of things, but then you want authentication, and suddenly where do I go? So, what Flask does is, instead of trying to put everything into the core framework, you allow the frameworks to be extensible, and then have a common pattern in which people can write their extensions. Instead of enforcing everything in code, like for instance what Zope does, as I said, Zope or Plone, essentially you are tweaking the framework to fit your requirement, then have a central core and then add layers of functionality around it. That's how I see Flask. Flask has a very strong small core. If you want to add extensions, you just add layers of code around it. We'll see this more in detail. And then there is something called as blueprints, which are essentially patterns. If you see the same pattern repeated in many places, then you may want to make a blueprint out of it. One simple example is, some examples are like admin. All admin pages look similar, all user pages look similar. And if you have a reports component in your application, then they share look and feel, and settings. So you may want to make them into blueprints. So these are some of the things that are interesting. And of course, you have a whole library of snippets, which are cookbooks categorized by the kind of usage. All these are available on the Flask website. And these are some of the popular combinations how people use Flask. Since Flask itself doesn't make choices for you, like, okay, this is the ORM I invented for you, so you are going to use it. No. Neither does Flask say that, I wrote the Jinja temporary language too, so you must use Jinja too. No, it's not like that. So you can essentially choose the parts that you like from Flask, the default setting, but choose something else. So this is the most common combination if you are doing a database application, which is actually a solid choice. But if you like some other template languages like Markov, which allows you to do more Python in template kind of programming, then you might choose this combination. This is the combination I'm using today for the demo. PV is another ORM, which is not as sophisticated as SQL Alchemy, but it's different. I wanted to learn it. In fact, I started to write the code this morning. So I wanted to basically make it harder so that I can learn something new. There's nothing new about writing ToDo applications. So I think I still have some code that I wrote in repos BFG. I don't know, even people remember. Of course, people from 6 feet up will remember that, but that's a framework precursor to pylons. So ToDo apps is something that you write, well, you're learning something. So I wanted to make it a little harder, so included PV instead of SQL Alchemy, and it was fun. This is what I was trying to do yesterday night at 2 a.m. But I couldn't write enough JavaScript MapReduce functions to do the querying properly. In fact, I can write the MapReduce functions correctly, but I was trying to use an extension called CouchDBKit, Flask CouchDBKit. Well, once again, it's a wrapper. So I think there was a bug, or I didn't know enough about the library to use it yesterday night at 2 a.m. So I thought, well, I'm going to just nuke it and start over again in the morning. So that's what I did. So in effect, to ask a question that was asked earlier, it took me, what, 6 hours to do this alone from the beginning to end. So how do you install? Well, like any other good Python package, you start with pip install Flask. And then this is the website, flask.puku.org. And so this is how a hello world looks like. Look at the simplicity and admire it. So you're essentially importing the Flask library, and then you're saying that make an app out of this module. That's what you're saying in this line. And then you're saying that the root of the application should be handled by this function. And this name doesn't matter. It can be anything. It can be foo, it can be root, anything you like. And then you're returning a string. So, and then that's what you see when you run this application. This is how you run it. So app.run. And you can give parameters to the run. You can specify a different port. You can specify the interface, things like that. So that's as simple as it can get. So what are the other defaults? I mean, of course, we are not just going to use an application which is just going to return strings to you. So we need templates. We need to serve some assets, static assets like CSS and JavaScript. So by default, Flask looks for templates under the templates directory, and under static directory for the assets. And let's look at the app that I wrote for this demo. And these are some of the choices, technology choices I made. Flask, of course, and then SQLite database for persistence. I talked about the other failed attempts, CouchDB. And I think I remember seeing Jonathan, where is he? You're Jonathan, right? No, you, yes, you. I forgot your name, sorry. Nathan, okay. So Nathan, Jonathan, okay. So Nathan, I saw Nathan's code, which had a Redis reference to it, and then I saw Clayton's code, which had SQL Alchemy in it. So I had to try something different. So I chose SQLite for the database, and then PV for ORM. And then there's something called WTF forms, I guess it's it's obvious what it is, because forms are probably the most icky part of developing code. I mean, whether you're using Django or you're using any other framework, forms and form validation is is the difficult part. So probably the frustration of the author is is shown in this title. Then I used the Flask PV wrapper. Once again, I talked about Flask extensions. For anything that you can think of, there is typically a Flask extension which does the job for you. So this Flask PV wrapper essentially does wrap the PV ORM for you, plus it also provides some authentication, that is user table and passwords and things like that. It also does other things like APIs. You can actually do a REST API using the same thing, but I'm not doing that. I'm not showing that because I wanted to keep this really about Flask and not about features. So in fact, if I get at least one person to start doing web programming because of this presentation, I will be very happy. So I don't want to talk too much about JSON, AJAX, deployment strategies, ModWSGI, all that. It's not relevant. What is more important is you have an idea, you know how to code, but you don't know how to put it on the web. And if Flask can help you do that, I'll be very happy. So in fact, I use the Bootstrap, well, like every other serious developer should use, because we can't design. So and then no JavaScript, not even a single line of JavaScript, because you can actually take this application to its logical conclusion. And I don't know, if we do another web shootout, I will write this exact application in all JavaScript and no server-side code. Okay, and in fact, you don't even need a server for this application to work. You can use IndexedDB, and you can have it all in the browser, and you can use some kind of replication using PouchDB to a CouchDB remote server to have it all in JavaScript. No Python. Yes. So since that is possible, I didn't want to add any JavaScript. So it's all HTML. Okay, so that's the app demo. We'll get to the app demo. That's what I'm calling my app. It's the Scooby song, Scooby Dooby Doo. So that's the. So this is the application layout. And Flask doesn't really come with any kind of what do you say, skeleton generators like you saw with Django, because with Flask you can start with an empty file like this, and you can type out your application. So what is important though is you look at this static and templates. Those are the two defaults that you may want to remember. But except that, you can start with any file, and then you can go from there. Oh, by the way, I compiled my presentation. So
wait, you used make?
Yeah, I used makefile. So that's my makefile to compile my presentation using some tech and. Okay, anyway, so that's a different presentation, but I thought. Okay, so this is our application. If you can see that I have a. No, I think this is. Can everybody see this?
I'll make it a little bigger.
Okay. Yeah, full screen too. 18. 20. Okay. Yeah.
Is that good?
Yep. Full screen.
Full screen?
Yeah. Oh, that way. Okay.
There you go.
All right. So if you see here, essentially I'm importing the stuff I need and nothing more. I did run PyFlake, so I know that there's something else that is not required here. You should run PyFlakes if you're not already. PyFlakes and Pep8. In fact, Clayton is our resident Pep8 guru, so you can ask him for details.
No time.
Sorry?
He'll get you set up in no time.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yep.
This has fantastic compiled, so you did a good thing.
Yeah.
Don't let it get out of Rails.
Okay, so we don't need a lot of things from Flask. You can see that I'm importing the base library Flask, and then Flash is what I use to basically show messages between pages. Redirect is to do a HTTP redirect thing, and then request is the request object. Then you have the render template to convert your templates into HTML, and then URL for basically gives a shorthand so that you don't have to remember what URL you designed for a particular endpoint. So, and then I'm importing the PV library as PW, WT forms, and then some other things. And then this is the settings. In fact, if you remember the Django presentation, we had the settings go into a different file. Well, of course, you can put this in a different file and import from there. But I wanted to show that you can start with a single file and modularize it as you like it later. So this is the database, test.db, and then this is the engine I'm using, and some other configuration keys. This is the interesting part. So I'm saying basically make this module into an application, and then read the configuration from this module itself. So instead of this, you can actually read from INI file or from XML file. There are different options, but since I have all of them here, I'm just reading it from the same module. And then I created a database reference. Then this is the authentication reference. So if you remember, both authentication and database, these are extension to Flask. So think of it as an onion. At the core, you have Flask, and then you added all the extensions on top of it. So that's all. I mean, every time I look at this code, that's the image that comes to mind, which is actually pretty neat. And then I wanted the user model. Basically, now I'm coming to the model in the MVC. The user model was already defined for me in the auth extension, so I'm just getting that. And here is where I started defining the models for the to-do task. So this is quite self-explanatory. There is nothing very interesting except, so if I want to query for all the tags belonging to a task, so I make this a property so that I can just say some task.tags, and I'll get this entire thing. And this essentially is the PV ORM query statement. That's quite self-explanatory if you know SQL. And that's one more thing. I don't hate SQL. I actually like SQL for what it does. And I think people should actually start with SQL because well, it's based on a lot of research and practical experience. And SQL is probably the most productive way of doing it. And then we have the tag class, which stores the tags, and then the task tag, that's essentially a many-to-many mapping, which maps tasks and tags. And you can see the foreign key references to both task and tag. That's it. That's the models. Okay. And then next we come to the forms. I don't have a lot of forms, just the one form that takes your input and stores in the database. So that's the forms. Okay. And there are ways to essentially map the database directly into forms, but I'm not doing that because that would be once again too much magic. So, and this is a simple form. There is something complicated about this. So I just wrote that by hand. And these are some additional helper queries that I wrote to return. For instance, the first query returns all the tasks belonging to a user, and then the second one returns all the tasks tagged with a particular tag belonging to that user. So that's the ORM code for that. In fact, if you see here, I'm not really good that good at SQL, even though I like it. It's not easy. Nobody said joins are easy. In fact, this is a hack. So I should have actually used a join here, one more join here. Instead, I queried the tasks, and then basically I'm passing them as strings. Okay, so which is not the best way of doing queries, but well, it's okay. And then these are the views. That is, this is where you're mapping the URL endpoints. So I'm saying that allow only the get method. I'm not allowing post methods on the home directory or home path. And then I'm saying that this requires login. And then So this feature essentially is to sort. I'll show that application. Probably I should show the application first so that you can see how it behaves. So this is the application. So first let me delete the database. Oops. So what I'm going to do is I'm essentially bootstrapping the database before starting. So I want to have at least a couple of users before starting. I didn't add a registration application because it wasn't in the requirement, and I'm not going to write anything that is not in the requirement. Probably less, not more. That's the key. So this is I have this function in the actual file. So this is the helper function that I wrote to create the tables. Django does it for you when you do syncdb, but there is nothing magical about this. I mean, if you have an ORM, you're saying that create the table. That's all. This is too much Vim for one day. Okay, so somebody asked whether you can test it using the console. Well, I mean, this would be the same command that you'll be typing in to test your stuff anyway. You're importing the whole library, your application, and then you're creating this. You can, of course, convert the same thing into a test by putting asserts or importing the unit test case framework and then putting them in test cases. What I'm doing here is creating objects, user objects, and then setting the properties and then saving them to users. In fact, I went ahead and did a lot more, which I'm not running because the junk data. So I'm going to run the did I run the no, I haven't run the bootstrap. So that's the Python environment that I'm using to run this application. Okay, so the database is created. I'm going to run the application. Startup on port 5005. That's right. Okay, so that's the application. I don't know how good that is looking. So if you see, this is the yellow thing you see on top is the Flash. Flash. This is provided by Flask. So there is a function, built-in function called Flash. You can pass any message to it, and then it will be available to you across what do you say, URL endpoints. Even when you do a redirect, this will be stored in the session and it's made available to you. So it's helpful when you're passing from one page to the other. So let's go ahead and add a task. Sorry? Zoom, yeah, sure. So that date widget is actually HTML5. Chrome does the supports what is called as the date input widget. So you can actually type a date and it properly, validates that. So there is no special jQuery happening because I said there is no JavaScript. So it's all HTML.
You didn't cheat there at all.
Nope. So yeah, you added the tasks, and I'm a minimalist kind of a guy. I don't like to have too many things. So it's like this is my to-do list. Everything is here. So I see I see my list here. If I want to delete something, I can just go ahead and do it right here. Okay, so let's see some other things. Let's add. Oh, there's a reason for that. So. So, the reason is that by default it's sorted by alphabetical order, that is the requirement. So, you can see it's sorted by that, or you can sort by the date, and now it is sorted by the date. Well, actually I should have chosen the other, but anyway. So, if you see this input parameter, that is basically coming from the link. So, I am passing that as the get parameter there. Yeah. Or we can look at only tasks with that tag. So, that is there, and then you can go back home using the link, and you can log out. So, that is the application. How am I doing on time?
I should wrap it up. We get
Okay.
questions in.
Okay. So, yep, that's it. So, if you have any questions, ask me.
Any questions for Pradeep? I have a question. So now that you've seen the bottle demonstration and the Flask demonstration, why would one person choose bottle over Flask or Flask over bottle for a micro framework?
Well, one thing is the community. The community matters a lot. In fact, I am a Pyramid user. I mean, I use Pyramid a lot. One reason I would choose Pyramid is because of the people, the core team. I mean, whatever Chris Mack done, if tomorrow he writes some ZZ framework, I'm going to follow him there. I'm going to check out definitely.
He tried to make it tonight, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so it's also, you know, the people. I mean, the quality of code that comes from the team, the core team. So Armin is a guy who writes very good code. He writes quality code. He has written solid libraries before. So that's one good reason. The second reason is you know, the prime focus on keeping things simple, you know, without trying to add too many things into the core framework. And the third thing is the web is open platform. That is, I mean, if you remember how things are done in ASP.NET, I mean, you know, all the view states and all that, you are actually adding a lot of CRUD on top of web, which is not supposed to be. And then later you end up, you know, having a lot of technical debt. So the best way to start is not have any technical debt. And Flask is a framework which doesn't have a lot of technical debts. That's of course the minimalist side of point of view, which Bottle also does well, and then probably other things. But the one thing that is probably Flask has done better over Bottle is build a community of people around it. I mean, if you remember the first slide, we said that Flask was actually inspired with Bottle's name, but Flask has since then overtaken Bottle in terms of mindshare, in terms of extensions available to talk to various other things. So I would say at this point, all other things being equal, it's the community and the size of the code available.
Any other questions?
I have one. This is going to come across as a potentially criticism, but I don't mean it that way. You know, you say you don't seem to be terribly fond of Django. I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I search the imagination.
What makes you say that?
Well, I did contribute to Django in 2007. In fact, you can, if you look at the authors.txt of Django, you can see my email address. I did some localization for Django. So it's not, see, you can only dislike something that you really know well. Sure. It's like your neighbor. Anyway.
But I mean, the impression that I get from at least this presentation is that, you know, Flask is great, it's minimal, but it doesn't have this feature that Django has, so I actually wrote it. And it doesn't have that feature that Django has, so I ended up having to write that. Why not just use Django?
Well, once again, that depends on what you're trying to do. See, it's not that Flask is good for everything. Right. Okay, so Django, if you remember, it came from a particular background. The background is content management systems, and in fact, particularly a journal. So they want newspaper, yeah. So they wanted a framework which allows them to put out content and have a good workflow which allows them to do that. That is, you have content producers, you have managers, and then you have, you know, that published on the web. So Django is actually very good for that. Okay, so but if you try to go a little outside of that, it's not very helpful. If you want to do, for instance, advanced SQL queries, you will hit against the ORM limitations. And if you want to, let's say, one of the things that I do with Pyramid is, once again, this is not to do with Flask, but where Django doesn't fit for my requirement in production code as of today is, I have a lot of modules which are independent of each other. That is, which are developed by different developers, but they're all used together as a single application in production. So the way we do that is each Python package is packaged separately. We have a private Python packaging index. You push that package to the index separately, and then your dependency management using your regular setup.py manages which versions of the package you are pulling and using. So that kind of thing is intuitive, or even I would say culturally mandatory in Pyramid, because the first time you run the Pyramid skeleton, you get the proper Python packaged skeleton. So what you do definitely influences the framework that you want to choose. The reason I use Flask is, for instance, the application that I'm talking about, this started with a very young developer. He didn't have any programming experience before, just out of college. So instead of bamboozling him with this whole big framework thing, I just gave him Flask and asked him to start developing with it. And once he had a stable code, we were able to move that to Pyramid because we had the same templating language and the same ORM, SQL Alchemy. The only thing that changed was the layout of the files. Basically put the files in the proper location according to the Pyramid, and then of course, Pyramid has a lot more configuration and wiring. We do that, and then you're done. So Django is not a bad, choice if your problem fits their problem.
Any other questions?
You said sometimes you use Flask, sometimes you use Pyramid. What would you use more?
So I would typically start a new development with Flask, because it's easier to start with one file with everything in one place than start a package and then try to develop that. So we start with Flask, and then depending on how complex it is, you might want to make it into a Pyramid application. That is me. I might make it into a Pyramid application, or I might just keep it as Flask. That is the second case, that is keeping it as Flask is especially true when it is a standalone application. One of the applications that still runs as Flask in my workplace is an application that basically runs through a lot of text files. It's weather data. There are like thousands of weather stations in US mainland. So you basically run through a lot of that, and then you do some analysis, and then output a single text file, CSV file. So that application, you can see it's very narrow in scope. Okay, and then it's a web service that lives on my network somewhere, and that's all I care about it. And then I basically make sure that that is up using Supervisor or some other monitoring program. If it is running, I don't care. I don't have to upgrade it because it does what it's supposed to do. That's it. So Flask is great. So if you're thinking services and standalone applications, whether it is outputting some kind of text or JSON or XML, Flask is all you need. You don't need to do anything else.
Excellent. I think there's one more question. Any more questions?
How long?
How long?
How long did it take?
This one?
Yeah.
This
I started this morning. So.
All right, let's give Pradeep a hand.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.